If you look up the word holy, one of the first similes that comes up is the word sacred, which is a little odd because, as we've mentioned before, in many ways sacred means just about the total opposite of holy. Sacred is what we decide it is. A piece of rock or fabric, a book, a building, some old bones. We talk of sacred trust, sacred ground, sacred traditions. We now even have sacred elections. And yet, really, it's all in the eyes of the beholder. My sacred flag is someone else's swimming shorts. My sacred cow is someone else's meatloaf. Whatever reference we make to something being sacred, you can guarantee it has little or nothing to do with God. It has everything to do with us. And so we feel entitled to go to war, to kill people, to abuse people in the cause of the sacred. But that has nothing to do with God, because God is holy, and by definition, holiness has nothing to do with us. Holiness is otherness. It is what we are not. It is of God, and as such, it is beyond our control. It is not subject to our wishes. It does not do our bidding. It is, by its nature, utterly out of our reach. And when we encounter the holy, we have no claim or purchase. It is Jonah enraged with a God who will not do his bidding and destroy Nineveh as he had hoped. It is Elijah hiding from God in a cave while storms and earthquakes and fire rip the earth apart, and finally learning there his own poverty and discovering that he is in charge of nothing. It seems to me that throughout Lent we are invited to walk this line between the holy and the sacred, always trying to find what is of God and immerse ourselves in that, and not stray into what is purely of us. Immersing ourselves in mystery and not simply in our own ends. This vague memory of, I think it's in one of Merton's conferences where he says, you're much better off enjoying a full meal with gratitude than thinking that by not using salt you're actually making a huge sacrifice. He distinguishes between penance as burden and penance as liberation, and the difference lies in how we undertake it. There are, of course, these three traditional disciplines that we associate with Lent: prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. They're not peculiarly Christian. They are common to all of the great religions, and each of those approaches in a different way the same shared goal. If nothing else, prayer is allowing some other voice to be heard at the core of our being, of creating sufficient silence and stillness for something else to speak to us other than the clanging of our own egos or the voices of that damage us. There is no possibility for conversion without insight, without silencing the incessant defenses and excuses and justifications, and considering some other perspective. Prayer is that shaft of light and of sanity that penetrates to the very heart, where the truth can be spoken, but spoken in love, and so it can be heard without fear. where that voice can silence other voices, the voices that tell us too often that we're incompetent, that we're deficient, that we're deeply flawed. We may in fact be all of those things, but it doesn't matter in God. That's the point. It all becomes utterly irrelevant because we are encountering something unconditional and something profound. A friend of mine with an eating disorder once said to me that this was having a disastrous effect on his family, and I asked him how, and he described how when his addiction mastered him, it wasn't just the addiction, it wasn't just food, it was this whole sort of network of behaviours in which he became secretive and deceptive, how it destroyed trust and truth in everything that he did. It wasn't just a case of sneaking down to the fridge in the middle of the night. It was this whole behaviour of hoarding and guarding and watching and lying. And so fasting can be from whatever it is that seduces us and separates us, that we've come to rely on, not so much for survival, but for protection and isolation. Whatever has come to shield us from God and from one another, and that disturbs relationship. That's why so many people fast from the internet. It's how many times have you seen entire families sitting in a restaurant, every one of them absorbed in their own little screen? And that's not actually the new norm for human behaviour, despite living in Silicon Valley. It's just another appetite prone to run out of control and damage. And so fasting is not a burden. It is not a weight loss program. It is not a survival test or anything else that has us checking in the mirror for progress and so leading back into ourselves. It is about liberation from that which has come to damage and limit us and to affect our relationships with one another. And in a sense, almsgiving then completes that journey that begins in prayer and is expressed in fasting, because it gives away that which causes so many of our preoccupations and anxieties. Money is so often the way in which we measure ourselves. It spells out our survival, our future, our comfort, and because of that, it is always in tension with relationship. Money is used to buy relationships, to sustain them, to control them, to substitute for them, and it's used to destroy them as well. And so, giving it away not only symbolizes, it actually realizes this liberation from self and stepping into that unpredictable and sometimes dangerous ground which is God. And the point is giving it away. It's not managing an investment. I know it's wise to check on the percentage that a charity's income is spent on administration, but you and I know that how easily that becomes an excuse for doing nothing, for inserting ourselves back into the equation, thinking that we're actually making an investment and then trying to dictate and control that, and end up being all about ourselves once again. So Lent is meant to be this holy season, but which can so easily become a sacred season. An endurance test, a competition, a burden, because like so much else that stifles our lives, it's all about ourselves. The sacred more or less covers Genesis, we see it's the temptation of Adam and Eve. It is what Satan offers Jesus in the wilderness, and still Lent revolves around the temptation to be at the center of everything that we do and say and touch. So these are just 3 ways of swinging ourselves away from being so self-preoccupied and opening our eyes and our hearts to the world and to the people around us. We're surrounded by vulnerable people who are struggling to survive in a season of lies and brutality and abuse. Temptations offered to Jesus by Satan are all about retreating into narcissism, into vanity, materialism, and an overblown sense of entitlement, into self-protection, into isolation, and so drawing away from a life that is lived in living trust and truth and openness. If there's some other better way that works for you, if there's a variation on any of these that leads you more deeply into connection with God's creation and makes you less self-serving, then go for it, embrace it, pursue it. God knows in these days our world is crying out for us all to wean ourselves off our self-protection, our preoccupation with our well-being, and come to one another's aid, particularly those who cry out to us for justice and liberation. So may it be.